Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. This is number 160 of the 1950s Fun Chats that we have recorded. The stories are remarkable, and we have another great one for you today, don't we, sister?
You bet.
Can you take it away?
I will.
Okay.
Just far enough, though. Viewers, welcome back again, or if it's your first time, welcome to the first time to the 1950s Fun Chat. We hope that you will be educated in ways you thought you never would need to be educated. We're going to talk about the 1950s, and all of this stemmed from our book, which is up in the right-hand corner. Can you see that? It's While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. And please note the purple banner below. Go to that site, www.whilethewindmillwatched, for all sorts of information on the book and our vendors and the authors and all of the previous 1950s Fun Chats. So today, I'd like to introduce you to someone who we know you will really enjoy. Born in 1947 in Browerville, Minnesota, Chuck Archer has been involved in education all of his life, with the exception of the first few years, of course. He lived in a small community through high school graduation and earned a degree in history and physical education from St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, with the goal of teaching and coaching. And he met that goal because after graduation, he taught and coached for 5.5 years. Still on an educational track, he became an assistant principal of a high school for 2.5 years, a high school principal for 29 years, a university teacher in Iowa State for 10 years, and for the past 7 years, he has taught in the OLLI program at ISU, and he will tell us what OLLI means a little later on. So this comes to a total of 55 years as an educator. Chuck and his wife, Brenda, have been married for 49 years. They have 2 children, Nicole, who lives with her husband, Mark, in Austin, Texas, and Chris, who, with his wife, Katie, have given them 2 granddaughters, Kayla, who's 7, and Kirby, 4, and they live in Singapore. So, Chuck, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, my honor to be with you.
Oh, thank you. We're glad to have you. So, in general, and this is a big general, describe a boy's life in a small town in the 40s and 50s in central Minnesota.
I think I was very fortunate to grow up in Browerville. Everything centered around 3 things for me in that town. One was family. My grandfather and grandmother lived there. When my grandmother died, my grandfather lived in our house with us. I had 2 younger sisters, one 5 years younger, Barb, and one 7 years younger, Peg. But everything centered around our family life. Secondly, everything centered around school life. In Browerville, it was almost 100% Catholic, town of 650 people. And we had 2 Catholic churches. We had a German Catholic church and a Polish Catholic church on Highway 71. We lived, fortunately, right across the street from the German Catholic church. And 4 blocks down the road was the Polish Catholic church. Ours was St. Peter's. The Polish Catholic church was St. Joseph's. So depending on your nationality, that's the church that you went to. We also had 2 Catholic grade schools, St. Peter's and St. Joseph's. And those that didn't go to the Catholic grade schools, we said they went to St. Public. They were in the public school.
Yes.
And it ended up, when you were playing games as such, it typically was the Germans versus the Polish. So we had that. Being a rural community, we had those that lived in town and could ride your bikes to your friends and have fun in town. And we had the people who grew up on the farm. And Browerville is a dairy farming area. The ground isn't the best. So people my age growing up would get up, milk the cows, cleaned up, ride the bus to school. After school, some would be able to stay for athletics, or those that couldn't rode the bus home. My town was very forthright in helping people that were rural, lived in a rural community. The town men volunteered to give the farm boys, and because it was only boys at that time that were out for athletics, at 5:15 they'd be up at the school and they'd take the boys home that were out for athletics. So there was that if you lived in town, you had one kind of a life. If you lived out in the country, in a rural, on a farm, you had another kind of a life. It was pretty easy in that little hometown to get on your bike and go find somebody to play with. And the community was around events. I mean, it's very vivid in my mind of the events of the community, and everybody attended all the events. That's a general talk about the community. I remember the big highlight for me growing up was, and we were ahead of, you remember the movie Sandlot, featured boys playing ball. We were ahead. We had Mace's lot. Tom Mace's dad and mom owned a house, and there was a vacant lot by their house. And we lived playing ball on that vacant lot. And no matter what season it was, we would play ball, except basketball there. We'd go to Johnny Eaton's hoop on his garage and play basketball. But for me, life centered around athletics. So if it was the spring of the year, you would go start playing baseball. If and all summer long you played baseball. In the fall of the year, you got your a leather helmet or whatever it was at that time, and you played football. And in the winter, you were able to get into the gym, sometimes through an open window, but in the high school gym, and you played basketball. So that was sort of my life growing up, along with church life, being raised up a Catholic at that point in time. Being an altar boy was real important, so you did that. You went downtown. I'm just amazed at the vitality of that little town in the 50s. We're talking 600 some people, and we had 5 small little grocery stores.
Oh my!
We had 5 gas stations. We had 3 car dealerships at that point in time, along with all the other things: a jewelry store, a meat market, a vets club, a municipal liquor store, a couple of blacksmiths, a weekly newspaper, those types of things. When I say it was centered around events, in the spring of the year, Memorial Day was huge. You had a Memorial Day parade, and the veterans would march in it, and you'd go out to one of the cemeteries and honor the veterans. It was huge for me. My dad who was in World War II, I'll never forget him coming down the stairs every Memorial Day because he would march in the parade. He was a rural letter carrier, by the way. Grew up in Browerville. He'd come down the stairs and he'd say, "Oh, my uniform shrunk this last year."
Yeah, they do that.
Yeah,
And
that wool just shrinks.
they'd have the parade, and then as a young kid, you couldn't wait for the 16-gun salute because then the discharge of the shells, and you'd collect shells. And after the program, you got like a Cheerio or something like that. My mom did not grow up in Browerville. My mom grew up in Holdingford, Minnesota. And if you're familiar with Lake Wobegon, Holdingford is one of the centers of Lake Wobegon. Her mom and dad, my grandfather during on that side, interesting story. During the Prohibition days, my grandfather made Minnesota 13 and went around and sold illegal liquor at that point in time. My grandmother has an interesting story on my mom's side. She came to Minnesota on an orphan train. Yeah, she was an orphan in New York City. And at that time, in the early 1900s, the orphan trains came, and she got off the train, in Avon, Minnesota, and a Meyer family had a number of boys, and they had 2 daughters, and they needed another girl to help. So my grandmother Rosie became a member of the Meyer family. So
Oh,
when we look at family trees, it only goes so far on one side.
Sure.
Going back to Browerville, my grandpa Achter had a tire and battery shop, and busted those farm tires by hand. Worked on the battery acid for their tractors. My grandmother was a homemaker. My mother graduated a 2-year degree from St. Cloud Teachers College and came to Browerville to teach at a 1-room schoolhouse, and met my dad, who was 2 years younger. And after he graduated from high school, he was drafted right away to go into the Army because of World War II. He came home and they got married and lived in Browerville their whole life. So that's a little snapshot of what it was like in Browerville. One thing I was getting on events in Minnesota, town team baseball is huge. The men of the town play baseball against men from another town. Almost every small town in Minnesota has a town team baseball team. You could not wait for the Sunday baseball games. They didn't have lights, so they're played in the afternoon. It was typical for my dad to get up early Sunday morning, drive a car up and park it on the third base side, along with other cars that were parked there already. And we'd go to church, and after church have lunch, and then walk up to the baseball game. My dad would sit in the car, and when the Browerville Braves got a base hit or whatever, they'd all honk the horns at the men their age that were playing baseball.
Yeah.
For me, it was exciting because when a foul ball was hit, you would go chase the foul ball, and if you were the first one there and got it, and you brought the ball back to the manager of the team, you got a nickel. So if I got a couple of foul balls, I could get a Hires root beer or a Nesbitt orange or whatever.
Cool.
Chuck, was there a fence around that baseball field or not?
A backstop had the fence. There was no dugouts. You sat on benches in the sun, and there was a fence in the outfield. But that's what we had. Yeah.
And when after church, when you then had a baseball game afterwards, and the car was parked there, did your mom pack a picnic lunch for you to eat?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't, because there was a concession stand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember what was served at that concession stand?
Hot dogs, candy bars. You couldn't at that time. You couldn't serve beer on Sundays. So one of the big things was, and then when I became old enough, like about 7 years old, I became a bat boy for the team. And then I progressed up through being a bat boy. And then when I got to be like a freshman in high school, I was a bat boy as an 8th grade. As a freshman in high school, Greg Myman retired as the first baseman, and I started playing first base at that point on the town team baseball team. So that's just how the events carry you through.
So the umpires, they were from other neighboring towns, or did they come from Minneapolis? Or?
No, they were from neighboring towns. People were 2 umpires, and I think people enjoyed giving them grief.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was a memorable moment in your life in regard with umpires and the players.
Yeah, I can remember a memorable moment of town team. At that time, there were some players, and you mentioned Minneapolis, that allegedly were good baseball players, and they would be baseball players by hire. And Jerry Eaton, the manager, one year found a guy by the name of Charlie Easter who would drive up to Browerville and pitch for the team, and he got $15 for the game. Until he couldn't get the ball over the plate, and then he was fired, and then they went back to the normal players from Browerville.
So that was all legal then to bring someone in?
Well, yeah, I think it was. But
okay, it happened anyway.
Yeah.
So you have a wonderful community, it sounds
yeah,
like.
and then another thing during that time, a couple of other things. The Browerville promoted a summer recreation program for boys to play baseball in the morning. And you started at T-ball. They were called rinky dinks. And then you went to pee-wees, and then you went to midgets, and then Legion ball. And that was in the morning. And in the afternoon, 2 of the afternoons, Monday and Wednesday, you'd go to the high school, and there was free play in the gym. You played wiffle ball or dodgeball. And they hired a young woman so the girls could come up, and they'd do arts and crafts 2 afternoons a week.
Oh,
and then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, everybody would meet at the water tower at, I think it was 12:30, and 3 buses would be there, and they'd pick you up, and you'd ride in the bus to Long Prairie, which was 8 miles away, and they had lifeguards at their lake, and they gave Red Cross swimming lessons.
Okay.
So 2 days a week, you went there for a couple of maybe 3 hours of swimming. And you get back on the bus, and then someone start singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall and all the way home. And then on Friday afternoons, they had movies, and it was like Three Stooges, Little Rascals kind of movies, and people would come and watch movies. The other part about Browerville that I love to talk about was there were lots of dance halls around Browerville. The people loved to dance, the polkas, the schottisches, the waltzes. There were like 4 dance halls that you could choose to go to.
And did an organization sponsor these dance halls?
They were privately run.
Okay.
Yeah. And then so that was important. Families would go to the dance hall, those types of things. The churches sponsored card parties. So like you'd go to a card party and you'd play 500, those kinds of things. So that was important.
So the children played cards too, or just the parents?
I didn't, but I know some of my friends played cards all the time with their parents, and they would go and they'd be part of those card parties.
Yeah. So in all of your town, it sounds as though you had quite a few influential people there. And can you think of a person or persons who might have helped you become the person you are today?
Yeah, I certainly can. We were blessed with some very, very good teachers in high school. And Jack Dressen, Mr. Dressen, Coach Dressen came there after World War II. He and his wife, Joe Dressen, and she taught mathematics and he taught social studies. And he was the coach. Coached football, coached basketball, was involved in the baseball program, had some sons that were younger than me. One thing I failed to mention on Mace's lot when I talk about the Dressens, but we ended up having games. The kids where Tom Mace lived on one end of town, and they were called the Rhubarb Nationals. And we lived in another end of town. We were called the Southsiders. And when we played, the Southsiders would play against the Rhubarb Nationals all the time. So I dragged the Dressen boys and Roger Fisher and a few others down. We'd go to Mace's lot, and Tom would have all of the boys from around that area organized, and we'd have fun playing ball games. So yeah.
Jeff, did you have uniforms?
We did not have uniforms for those games, but we did have those wool itchy uniforms in peewees and midgets, that the town bought. They didn't have numbers on the back, but they had the name of the grocery store who sponsored that uniform or whatever on the back. So so you wore those. I remember when I got my first uniform, I put it on, I slept in it that first night because it was such a big deal.
Yes.
So back to those influential people you were about to tell us.
Yeah. Mr. Dressen was phenomenal, ahead of himself as a coach and as a person, not only in athletics, but he was a sponsor of the student council, and he eventually ran for the city council, but he also worked at the school during the summer. He was an artist and a painter. And we weren't treated like small town people by him, and the way we were treated with the uniforms that we had, with the pictures that he painted, with the signs that he put up, and just the way he treated people. So yeah, he was growing up. He would be that, along with my parents and other people in the community. Because that's what you knew, is the people in that community. In the middle 50s, Mr. Stolell was hired, and he became our baseball coach, and was also a biology teacher and a counselor. He would have been very, very important. But also growing up, you'd go to all the games. So when you're in grade school, you're watching people like Tom Connor or Jim Arnold play, and they became your heroes. I was also grew up big for my age, so I had to play with kids older than me. There was a young man 2 years older than me by the name of Walt Blankish, and Roger Fisher and John Eaton. They were 2 years older. They were my heroes, and all of a sudden I was playing with them. So that was always fun. So yeah. I think those would be the people. One last story. I'm sorry I'm telling so many stories, but another hero of mine, as I look back of it, and it's one of those unsung heroes. I don't think he knew what he started, but we lived right across the street from St. Peter's Church. The priest parsonage in our house and our garages were equal to each other. So one Saturday when I was like a second or third grader, Father Kramer backed out of his driveway across Highway 71 and backed into our driveway and honked the horn. And it was Saturday morning, I'd say around 11 o'clock. And my mom and dad came out, and he said to them, "Do you think Chuck would like to go to the St. John's football game with me?" And they said, "I'm sure he would." So they went and got me, and I sat in the back, and Father Kramer didn't say a word the whole way down, smoked a cigar. And when we got there, he gave me some change to buy a treat. If you probably have never been to St. John's, but it's voted one of the 10 best football fields in the United States. It's in a bowl, and St. John's is out in the country, and it's treed. And the priests would stand up on a hill above the bleachers and smoke their cigars and watch the game. And I went down in the front row, and I was just amazed at watching St. John's University football team play. And then the game is over with. I get back in the car, and he'd always say something like, "Good game." And I go, "Yep." And that was our conversation all the way back.
That was it.
He'd never call, but when there was another home game, he'd back out and honk the horn, and I'd get in. And for my life, never did I ever think about going to another place to go to college. St. John's. So in a way, he was pretty influential.
I guess he was.
So Chuck, you mentioned his car. Tell us about that car.
Oh, it was just a Plymouth, regular Plymouth. I'd sit in the back seat, and he'd sit in the front seat, and he drove. He was an athlete. In grade school, we would love it when the third recess would come in the afternoon, and he'd come up and he'd pitch softball to the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys. And that was fun because recess got to go another half hour or 45 minutes because Father Kramer was there pitching. So
Father Kramer.
Yeah. So there were lots of local heroes that you had. Because we didn't have a lot of TV, we didn't have a lot of media. You sort of caught baseball scores, and at that time, the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Dodgers still played in Brooklyn. The Giants still played in New York. The Yankees were there, and St. Cloud had a farm team, Class D farm team that was from the New York Giants. The Minneapolis Millers at that time were from the New York Giants. So I sort of followed the Giants. Orlando Cepeda, Juan Marichal, Jim Hart, all those players. My friend Roger loved the Brooklyn Dodgers, Duke Snider, Sandy Koufax, those type. We argued all the time with who had the better team. And if you're ever interested in reading a book, Doris Clarence Goodwin wrote a book called Wait Till Next Year. She grew up in the Brooklyn area and had that love of the Brooklyn Dodgers and did not like the New York Giants at all. And when I read that, I thought of her and myself, her being Roger and myself, the arguments that went back and forth. about it. And then Milwaukee had the Milwaukee Braves, and they were close enough. And Hank Aaron and Lou Burdette and Warren Spahn, Del Crandall played for those teams. But what I'm getting at is one of the hobbies that we all had was collecting baseball cards. And the local grocery stores carried the baseball cards. We were pretty convinced that Brenny's was not the place to get a baseball card because they had a younger son, Bobby, who we were convinced that would go through the baseball cards and take the best ones out.
Yeah.
So we always went to Gaida's to get the baseball cards.
Okay.
And then we had traded baseball cards. Yeah.
What were the best baseball cards?
Well, Mickey Mantle rookie
sure.
card was really good at that time. Harmon Killebrew was good. Roger Maris. Del, as I mentioned, the Braves. Hank Aaron. Willie Mays was a huge card if you could get a Willie Mays card. Yogi Berra. Those types of cards.
Do you have your collection still?
I wish I did. I'm one of those that probably would say our mother, may she rest in peace, didn't think it was important, and somehow it's got lost.
Yeah.
Was this all before the Minnesota Twins were organized?
Yeah, the Twins came to town in 1960 or 61, and it was big because Brenny's got the Twins caps. And we got those Twins camps, and now we had our own team, Harmon Killebrew,
Yes.
all those people.
Are you still a Twins fan?
Oh yes, I'm a closet Twins fan. I'm not real happy with them right now, but I was fortunate in my coaching career to coach a young man who was a very good baseball player and made it and played on the Twins, and was the catcher when they won the 87 World Series. So
Wonderful.
I'm a pretty big Twins fan. Yeah.
Were you at some of those series games?
No, I couldn't get a ticket for that, but we watched it, and but we did go when he was playing. We went to a lot of Twins games, and that was always fun. I went down to spring training one year and watched him in spring training, and that was really
yes.
fun. Yeah.
Our grandma, who lived in Oaks, North Dakota, was a huge Twins fan. She would sit in front of that, get in her little rocking chair, and sit in front of that portable TV. Yeah. And Jackie and I better not disturb her because the Twins were playing ball.
That was really funny. So you've talked about a few of the events of the 50s as far as sports are concerned. So what do you feel are some major events that occurred during the decade of the 50s?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about the 50s, we have to remember the millions of people that came home from World War II and the GI Bill and men coming home. I just love Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation.
Right.
He talks about ordinary men doing extraordinary things and then coming back and being ordinary men again. So I think that shift of having the women do the work, the industrial work in the United States, and then coming home and falling in love and getting married, and then they became the housewives and the men became the breadwinners.
Yeah.
I think that gets missed a lot when you talk about the 50s. We were unfortunate. At that time, we had the Red Scare, communism, the worry about communism taking over the world. Joseph Stalin and USSR, they went against what they were supposed to do at the end of World War II and took over the eastern countries of Europe. And we got the Iron Curtain that existed, the Berlin blockade, those types of things. The United Nations started before that. And when you roll into the 50s, right away you have we still have Truman. Remember, he beat Dewey in the election according to everybody else, but the Chicago paper had the headline wrong.
Yes.
Chicago paper, yeah.
Yeah. So the Korean War, again, it was that case of the USSR and China helping North Korea, and they went across the 38th parallel, and we weren't ready to be part of it, but we became part of it. And that battle back and forth, and General MacArthur, who was a World War II hero, who really wanted to nuke all the areas, and Truman didn't want that. And he's actually the only general who's ever been fired by a president. It ruined MacArthur, but it also ruined Truman's career because people were in love with MacArthur. So he didn't run for re-election. And the hero of World War II, Eisenhower, was a reluctant political candidate.
Yeah.
And a little story there, they didn't know if he was Republican or Democrat. And he got interviewed by both parties. And at the end, the Republican party felt he was more Republican than Democrat. But he was just a hero. And he really was not a politician as such. So, I mean, he won the 52 election against Stevenson, won the 56 election against Stevenson. During his time, we weren't aware of this, but Eisenhower got us into Vietnam in 1952, right away. In 54, we sent advisors over there. We sent money because France was losing that war to Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese. We had money there. We had advisors there. We had tons of equipment and tons of planes that we had sent there. But not a lot of us knew about that. And then we had the Red Scare right in the United States. We had McCarthyism, if you remember, and all of that went on at that point in time. The arms race following the nuclear bombing of Japan. We had a proliferation of H-bomb testing in the islands, the Pacific Islands, that took over. And I think everybody will remember that day in 1957 when Sputnik went up and we were in second place in the arms war.
Yeah.
That was really difficult for us. As a result of it, education became important again, and we had a lot of money going in for science and mathematics to get us into the arms race. And the civil rights movement started in the 50s. We had Brown versus Board of Education, which integrated the schools in the South. Well, allegedly did, but the schools of the South didn't. And we remember Little Rock, Arkansas Central, and what happened with the 9 people that couldn't get into that school. That was huge. We had Rosa Parks, who, let me go back. When the South didn't agree with what was going on with integration, they had Jim Crow laws, and they didn't follow what was supposed to be followed. So it was that the blacks in one area and the whites in one area and all of that. And Rosa Parks got kicked off a bus in Montgomery. And the next day, they decided that they were going to have a bus boycott. That went on for over a year, and it was found to be unconstitutional to have whites in the front and blacks in the back. And after a year, and that's right where Martin Luther King gave his first speeches there. He was a young 26-year-old minister, and he was in Montgomery, his first job. And he led meetings every night of all the African Americans who were boycotting the bus, had his life threatened every day. And he believed in nonviolence and preached that in Montgomery. And that's where that got started. Unfortunately, we probably remember the murder of Emmett Till, the young boy from Chicago who went down to Mississippi and made a mistake and was murdered by some people. And the last part of what I think is the most important part of that civil rights movement was the nonviolent sit-ins of the segregated lunch counters in Nashville. Jim Lawson was down there teaching the young kids, the college kids, how to protest without being violent. And that started in 1959. People like Diane Nash and Marion Barry and Bernard Lafayette and John Lewis and James Belzer, they were if we were going to go into the 60s and study all the events in the 60s, they were really, as 21, 22-year-olds, who really led us through that. So,
Chuck, when we talk about, I'm going back a little bit now to the race for space and Sputnik and being concerned about the atom bomb or the Russians coming to occupy the United States. Did your parents ever show any emotion, or did you ever hear any conversation about how they might have felt in their town in Minnesota?
That's really a good question, and I don't know if they. No, my parents never talked to me about that.
Okay.
They might have talked about it when they were out with other couples, but I don't remember much of that at all growing up. Of course, you only had the radio. Sometimes you had the news on the TV that you got to watch, but it didn't mean anything because you just left. You spent time in Browerville, unfortunately. Yeah. But it didn't mean anything at that point in time.
And were you taught in school, in high school, taught anything about that part of history?
Well, I was taught, and this is not going to sound good, but when I was in grade school, we had a Catholic nun who was really worried about communism. And she, it was one of those grade schools first and second grade were in one room. Third, fourth, and fifth in another room, and sixth, seventh, and eighth were in another room, and the fourth room was the lunchroom. And we'd go to church, and then we'd come from church, and we'd get into the classroom, and there'd be board work for us to do, copy down questions and answers from the Lord Baltimore Catechism, and then she'd go and talk to the head cook, and she'd come back in. And I just had a class reunion a couple of weeks ago, and a town reunion. And I want to talk one thing about that in just a second. That she would come in and she'd say, class, Mrs. Brown and I heard a plane flying over, and we think it might be communists. We're not going out for recess. Or she'd say, class, Mrs. Brown found a piece of candy on the playground walking up here today. We think it might be put there by the communists. We're not going out for recess. I didn't think, I just thought I was being punished at the time, couldn't go out for recess. But as I look at it, that brought conversation on what's going on, but it really didn't mean anything to me.
Did you have to hide under the desk?
We did. We had to hide under the desk. That's right. And I got so worried for that I went out our back door and went across the railroad tracks out into a farmer's field and made a little place, a fort, where if the communists did come to Browerville, I could take my two sisters out there and we'd be safe. Barb and Peg and I would be safe out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So before we go, I'd like to have you tell us about Ollie, O-L-L-I, and how you became interested in teaching classes on the topic of the 1950s.
I will, if I could just add one other thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This past summer, a couple by the name of Ron and Jane Brown organized an all-town reunion for Browerville. It wasn't like a class reunion. It was an all-town reunion. And Jane Brown did history. And when you walked into the event center in St. Cloud, there were tables of three folds honoring the firemen, honoring the mail carriers, honoring the teachers, honoring the history of it. Families brought their family history with trifolds, and they had presentations. And I just think Jane continually says the stories can't be lost. We have to keep telling stories. And I just want to compliment you in your book that you wrote. And those stories aren't going to be lost. And by having this, stories aren't going to be lost. And that really convinced me that we have to do more to tell those stories. My son and I happened to on purpose, visited the Battle of the Bulge battleground to experience what my dad had as a 19-year-old. And I've put together that story. I don't want that story lost, what the 18 and 19, or excuse me, the 19 and 20-year-olds experienced during World War II.
Yes.
So, yeah. But that was really fun to have people from Browerville together and be able to, the presentations were important, but to be able to sit at a table and just remember this, remember that.
Yes.
The farm kids who are learning about robotic farming that's now going on. The business people learning about a young woman who has Sprinkle of Joy store in Browerville now.
Sprinkle of joy, huh?
Yeah, it's a wonderful place. And all of those things. If it wouldn't have been for Ron and Jane Brown, it was just a perfect kind of a thing. So, yeah. But anyway, Ollie, the Osher, a Lifelong Learning Institute, it's run through the Alumni Association at Iowa State. It started back in the early 2000s, and retired people just organize classes, and people take them. It costs $35 a year to be a member, and there's a fall semester, a winter semester, and a spring semester, and people write classes. I think this semester there are like 50 some classes that are being taught. And the neat part is many of them are taught on Zoom. So Jackie in Washington, you could take a class. We have, I think last year we had people from 19 different states taking classes. My wife took some classes, and then when I retired from teaching at Iowa State, she said, you should really get involved in something like this. And I took a class and I thought, I'd like to start teaching in this. So I've been doing it ever since for the last 7 years. And I just have so much, I have so much fun listening to the students talk about things that they grew up. So, yeah.
And when one teaches something, they learn more.
Yes.
Maybe they're just as rewarded as the student. Maybe more.
I've read so many books that I never, now I could have time to read the books, but I would never have thought about reading books like I've read to help prepare me for this, doing this. So it's really been fun. Yeah.
Well, and I have discovered with my life that the older I become, the more interested I am in the past.
Yes.
When I'm younger, I don't have time for the past. I'm making the past. The past at that point.
I have a monthly Zoom with my two sisters and my first cousins on the Achter side. And I don't think a time goes by that we don't say, I wonder why we didn't ask our grandpa this or our parents that. Right. So you're right. Yeah.
Yes. Chuck, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been an honor to remember when with all of you. I hope I didn't muddle up too much, but thank you so much.
And we know that there's so much more of remember when in your head too that we didn't get to today. So thank you. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. God bless all of you. Yeah.
It's been a fun chat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jackie, how can you close us out today?
Well, I just want to thank all the viewers for watching, and to tell your friends, even your family, about the 1950s Fun Chat, in hope that they will enjoy being educated about the decade of the 50s. So until next time, toodaloo.
Yeah, bye-bye.